So, investors that are bullish on the long term growth of artificial intelligence are certainly comparing AMD and Nvidia stock and asking themselves which one is the better stock to buy to capitalize on this AI trend. I know I've been considering this decision and thinking about this for a couple of years now. So, I'm going to make this comparison for you right now for AMD and Nvidia, and I'm going to look at several critical financial metrics, including revenue growth over the previous decade, the company's returns on invested capital, and the company's valuation, both in terms of the forward price to earnings ratio and, according to my proprietary valuation from my discounted cash flow valuation model for both AMD and Nvidia. And then I'll provide you the answer of which one I think is the better buy, Nvidia or AMD. But of course, I've evaluated way more information that I'm going to share with you just in this brief video. As I mentioned, I've been following these companies for over 5 years now, 6, 7 years now. So there's a lot more that goes into this decision, but I'm going to share with you the big picture in a sort of summary analysis of these two companies head to head.
I want to thank The Motley Fool for sponsoring this video. Visit fool.com/Parkev for the 10 best stocks to buy now.
So let's start with revenue growth going all the way back to 2014, which is really interesting because, as you could see here, in 2014, they had nearly identical revenue for around $4.7 billion. In fact, AMD was slightly ahead of Nvidia in that fiscal year. But since then, Nvidia's growth has more than doubled AMD's growth. And Nvidia, in the most recently updated figure, generated $131 billion in revenue, while AMD generated $28 billion in revenue. Now, the only thing that makes AMD's growth poor is comparing it to Nvidia. Because if you just look at AMD's growth by itself, it's impressive in its own right, growing revenue from 4.7 to $28 billion. It's impressive. It's solid, 17.1% compounded annual revenue growth. And this comes at larger scale, and this comes as the business has shifted to a more attractive ratio between data center and everything else, right? Personal computing, gaming consoles, all of the other stuff AMD does is right now about half of the business, and the data center for AI is about half of its business, which I think if investors were asked that question, you would prefer a larger percentage of the company's revenue coming from the data center segment because that's the faster growing segment. That's the more profitable segment. That's the segment that has the strongest demand looking forward several years into the future. So you're getting this business at a much improved percentage of revenue allocation today than you were 10 years ago. So both impressive businesses. I've had both of these companies rated as the top 9 stocks to buy in 2025. So I like both of them. They've both demonstrated great performance. Nvidia, so far, with revenue growth, much better, more than twice as good as AMD. The next thing I wanted to compare is the return on investor capital going back to 2016. And by the way, I'm getting these charts from finchat.io. There's a link in the description. It's my affiliate link. If you use it, you'll get 15% off your subscription. Return on investor capital is in favor of Nvidia more recently, but it hasn't always been the case. During the pandemic years of 2020 and 2021, AMD's returns on investor capital actually were better than Nvidia, as Nvidia's profits declined because remember, Nvidia used to get a large percentage of its revenue from people buying its GPUs, using them to mine cryptocurrencies. That was a big thing for Nvidia. That was a big factor for Nvidia in those years, those pandemic years when cryptocurrency prices were soaring. But then cryptocurrency prices crashed in 2022, I want to say, late 2022. And during that crash, NVIDIA's revenue from that segment declined. And at the same time, AMD was benefiting from the boom during the COVID years in the PC industry when everyone needed to have a home office, and not just every household, but every individual in every household needed a computer now because one for the whole house wasn't enough anymore. Everyone was working from home, learning from home, entertaining from home. And so a shared computer was no longer enough. There was a boom in the PC industry. That was great for NVIDIA. There was also a boom in purchases in gaming consoles. That was great for AMD. So AMD had a number of positive factors going on during the pandemic years that benefited it more than it benefited NVIDIA. And so in those years, it outperformed. But looking at the longer term, the previous decade, NVIDIA has outperformed AMD by a large margin. And I expect that to continue looking ahead over the next decade. I expect NVIDIA's returns on investor capital to be much better than AMD's, primarily because NVIDIA is the market leader in the AI industry that's growing rapidly. Its products are selling out. And then on top of that, AMD, as I mentioned, only has roughly 50% of its revenue coming from the data center AI segment. The other 50% is everything else, which do not generate as large positive margins as the data center segment does. So that will be weighing on the company's returns on investor capital looking ahead the next decade. So advantage NVIDIA again in this comparison. So now let's look at valuation, and let's start with my proprietary DCF calculations. For NVIDIA, I calculated the intrinsic value per share at $127.68, current market price at $135. I would rank this as the company being fairly valued at this valuation. The weighted average cost of capital is 14%, and since the return on investor capital was over 100%, you've got a great ROIC to WACC ratio, which is something I consider as part of my valuation framework. AMD, I've calculated its intrinsic value per share to be $129.89, current market price $114.53. NVIDIA stock, the calculation, my intrinsic value calculation, has this business ranked as being undervalued, whereas NVIDIA was fairly valued. I also like to look at valuation on a forward price to earnings basis. And looking at this, NVIDIA stock is roughly 10% more expensive than AMD stock, trading at a forward PE of 31 compared to a forward PE of 27 for AMD. So by all measures, or by the two measures I shared with you in this video, NVIDIA stock is more expensive than AMD stock. But in my opinion, NVIDIA has earned that premium valuation. The return on investor capital compared to WACC, weighted average cost of capital, is enough for me to make that decision. But in addition to that, NVIDIA's revenue growth is better. Its percentage allocated revenue from the data center AI segment is much larger. Its operating margins are much better. I could go on. And so I think NVIDIA has deservedly and comfortably earned this much of a premium over NVIDIA. So if I had to choose between these two and I wanted to get only one of them, I would get NVIDIA. In fact, I have NVIDIA. I've chosen NVIDIA. I have NVIDIA in my own portfolio. I do not have AMD.
Hey everyone, if you like watching my videos, then I've added a great complimentary product just for you. I've written a book that's available for sale now that highlights my 6-step investing framework. Even if you don't follow that investing framework, just reading it and knowing how I evaluate stocks will make it a lot more interesting and informative to watch my videos. I've added the link in the description below.